tell us about the journey that you've been on. And really, I think about the journey that led to the birth of the Satya Yoga Cooperative.
Yeah, so my journey with yoga started as a kid. My dad kind of forced me to practice yoga as a teenager. When actually, and it so happened that he was sort of going through a healing process of his own at the time, and turning back to yoga and his roots. You know, he's the son of two Ayurvedic physicians, and in his mid 30s, kind of was having a bit of a midlife crisis, I guess you could say, and started kind of really turning towards the practices that he grew up with. And maybe 2-3 years into that process, he sort of, in a very like militaristic style, you know, decided that the entire family is going to join him on this journey. So that's how it started. So I can't say that I, you know, grew up loving yoga. You know, actually I really hated it, you know, during my teenage years, but then I went through kind of a personal crisis myself, you know, in my late 20s. Um, and I ended up turning to yoga as well. The situation that I was in, you know, a very abusive marriage. I started going to a yoga class with a friend of mine, mostly just to avoid or delay going home. But one of the things that happened was, well, one, it was very familiar because, you know, I had grown up doing some of this stuff. Then also, I I didn't I didn't have words for it at the time, but I was very disassociated at the time, right? Like just nowhere near my body ever, you know, like, and so I was actually, um, you know, starting to like get into a situation where I wasn't even able to drive, you know, because my mind was just so not connected. So what started happening with the yoga class that I was attending was that it was starting to bring me back, right? It was starting to reconnect me to my body. Um, and you know, that was just a class with, you know, with a white woman in San Francisco. Um, but that I credit that return to yoga as the thing that gave me the strength, you know, to leave that relationship. And so then afterwards, I decided I wanted to pursue it, you know. So I went to India. I studied there. I came back to Denver, and I just want to acknowledge, you know, Denver is the ancestral lands of the Nuche, Hinonoi, and Tsitsistas people, amongst many others, um, which is where I grew up and where my family lives. And I started trying to teach yoga here,
Mm.
and was not really finding um, not really finding my niche, because I think what I considered yoga and how I thought about yoga was not what was popular, right? Like that was not kind of the mainstream of how yoga was being taught here. So I tried for a good 10 years. You know, during that time, I also experienced a lot of microaggressions, and, you know, and even I would have to say where it was starting to bleed into sort of like institutionalized or systemic racism, right, in the yoga world. And um, so I had an incident that happened that completely, you know, disillusioned me. um, I thought that I was going to stop teaching yoga at that point because I was so frustrated, you know, so frustrated and disillusioned. But I wrote a big long rant and published it in Elephant Journal, which is just sort of like an online yoga publication based in Boulder here. And then someone contacted me from an organization called Center for Trauma and Resilience, and asked if I wanted to teach a yoga class for women of color. And I was like, yes, yes, I do. And so, so that was the beginning, really. I started teaching that class for Center for Trauma and Resilience. And it was so healing for me. And also, it was the first time that I really felt like I was connecting with an audience that was receiving, what I wanted to offer in terms of yoga. So, so that just kind of got the ball rolling. Like I felt like we need so much more of that. We need so much more of that in the world. And that I felt that the best way to create more of that in the world would be to train more teachers of color. Because at that time, there really weren't very many teachers of color in the yoga world. So now there's a lot more, which I'm so grateful for. But, at that time, I really felt like it was important to train more teachers of color. So I offered a yoga teacher training for people of color. Like I developed the curriculum, and I had been teaching for other teacher trainings, all along. And that was sort of where I was finding my niche in the yoga world, because I did have a lot of knowledge that people found valuable, so I knew I could put it together, and I started offering that yoga teacher training for people of color in 2014. And then about 4 years later, it grew into a co-op. So now, now we are a worker member owned yoga co-op, and it's BIPOC owned and led.